Hello, everyone. Welcome to our design journal. I believe this is number 22 now, is it? That's a lot of design journals we've done. But anyway, it's good to be here tonight. Sorry about having to reschedule for a different night, folks. I know that Sunday nights never work as well as Thursday nights for people, and you're probably going to end up watching this recorded, but nothing I could do about it. We got a lot going on here. My daughter leaves for college in 2 days, which is pretty fantastic and exciting, but it's her first year. So things have been a little hectic around the house. And so we've had some family things that I've had to attend to in the time that we've had. So I do apologize for having to reschedule this. However, in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started with our usual stuff. It's a pretty weak mail call this week, just to let you guys know. It's not really the biggest mail call. I did get a Death Star 2 Darth Vader showed up in the mail, which is pretty awesome. And I haven't even had time to open it yet. But even cooler is this that my mom sent me. She found this Pee Wee Herman ring, which I have no idea why it's done in like an old, sepia tone Pee Wee and why he's on a ring, but I've got it and it's awesome. So it's super cool. But I just had to share that bit of mail call for the week. Now let's talk a little bit about our gaming. We haven't been able to start the Simba Room adventure, although I've been still doing the playtest group. The Simba Room stuff has had to take a back seat just because all of us have stuff going on. A number of us have kids going to college. It's that time of year, right? But in the meantime, we have been keeping busy. We finished up our Nemesis adventure, and everyone died. Not surprising anyone. The game's basically based off aliens. So, occasionally someone makes it out. My Space Marine did manage to get off the ship, but unfortunately he was infected and a chest burster jumped out and killed him before he managed to get to the planet. So ended my chances at winning the game. Because we had some more time, because everyone died, we were able to get in a little bit of Thunder Road Vendetta from Restoration Games. If you're not familiar with Restoration Games, they've been coming out with remakes of a bunch of old games. This is a game from the 80s that's just amazing. The remake is a blast, and especially if you don't think too hard about it, right? This is one of those games where you just got to go. You catch on fire, you fall into pits, you ram people into cliff faces. It's amazingly fun, and it's got one very cool mechanic, which is whenever you reach the end of the third tile, you pull off the end tile and put a new one on at the front. So you have sort of this running road race going on while you're going along with it. So very cool system, very cool game. And in case anyone's wondering, and I don't know if I need to say this, but no one pays me for these. I just like to share the cool, nerdy things that we've been doing and cool games we've been playing and stuff. The other thing, though, that I am preparing to fill in a gap with is I discovered a game. It's only a couple pages long, right? It's a PDF. It's 2 pages long. It's a role-playing game. And this game is called Cracker Barrel Has Fallen. Now, Cracker Barrel Has Fallen is a game where it's a zombie apocalypse, and the restaurants were some of the last holdouts, and Cracker Barrel, which was the only other restaurant in the area, is gone down, and you are the employees of the Waffle House, which is the last restaurant standing. And the adventure is getting through the night at a Waffle House with your fellow Waffle House employees after Cracker Barrel has fallen. This game is just crazy. It's super simple. It's made by someone called Oops All Smurf, who I don't know who they are, but I actually found their site on itch.io, and so you can find all of their stuff there. Grab yourself a copy of Cracker Barrel Has Fallen. Just a really just silly, fun 2-pager. Have a good time and be kind of fun, be a little bit silly for the night. So yeah, Cracker Barrel Has Fallen looks pretty cool. So we're going to be playing that just as a filler, the nights where we're waiting for the other guys to get there, we'll do a little Cracker Barrel zombie fighting along the way. So anyway, yeah, so that's where things stand in the gaming front. That's our mail call. Not a whole lot more than that going on right now. But yeah, kind of exciting. One of the things that's sort of been in the news lately for gamers is the issue of AI art. I just want to be really clear that we don't support AI art and won't have AI art in any of the products. It's just not something that I'm not going to get into it here, but just in case anyone's wondering about that, it's not one of the things that we're going to be doing. We're going to be using real hand created art by real artists throughout this process. So in case you're wondering about that, now you know where we stand on it. So I just wanted to clear that up. All right, so let's talk. Our focus tonight is going to be the survey. You want to see what people said? You want to hear what people are saying about the game after they play tested it? Now's your chance to find out. So let me go ahead and bring up our survey results. So, there were a couple of questions before this, but I'm not going to go through those because it includes, people's personal information, which I don't need to share. But yeah, let's take a look at this. First off, one of the first questions I asked, and part of this is because to let you guys know with this survey, one of the things that we do is we look at all of the information as a whole, but then we try to parse out some ideas about the information based on details. Like, for example, players who have played for 10 plus years, that's almost all of our respondents on this survey. All right. That's a lot of 10 plus years survey respondents. So the people who are play testing, who are actually getting in there and trying it right now, are pretty experienced gamers. This is valuable for us to know for a whole lot of reasons. For one thing, it helps us to understand what sort of a background they're bringing to the table. But more importantly, I think, are these folks here, these sort of outliers who have been playing for a much shorter period of time. Now, what I haven't done yet is tie together their responses. But what I want to know is whether the responses from our less experienced gamers are any different than our experienced gamers. So I apologize, I can't give you that information tonight. But then again, we don't have a huge sampling, so it's a little bit tricky to tell. But regardless, it is something that I think is going to be interesting. We had about 27 respondents overall, which is not bad for this alpha, which is a very light, very, not a lot of people are going to try this out or invest a lot of time into it. That's a pretty good turnout, I thought. I was pretty happy with that overall, especially if you think about it as a percentage of our overall backer base. So that was pretty cool. Looking at it here, let's go on next to what your favorite RPG system is. So yeah, you'll notice that D&D comes up again and again and again. Cortex Prime, another great system. Savage Worlds is also great. Oh, D&D Basics, an expert. I approve of that one very much so. Let's look through here. Cipher System, more Cipher System, more D&D. A loaded question. Well, okay, so I get it that, yeah, look, there are certainly all of strengths and weaknesses. We're not trying to get a perfect result on this. We're just trying to get a sense of it. If people just right from the hip shout D&D, that tells us something. If they shout 5th edition, that tells us something, right? And we did get a lot of that where people had no trouble calling that out. Also GURPS, some AD&D as well, some IC RPG as well. A lot of crunchy systems, but a lot of more modern design systems as well. So a nice mix of different types of systems that are people's favorites here. So this is actually really nice, right? Cool name. Well, okay. This is what happens when you ask your friend to test the survey for you. At any rate, the whole idea here is that what came out of this is that we have a broad set of testers out of these 27 testers. We couldn't ask for a better sampling of testers based on this. Some people are picking very crunchy systems. Others are picking more storytelling-based systems. And in the middle, we've got a nice mix of the halfway between the D&D, the Pathfinder, right? 3rd edition stuff. Very, very cool to see all of this. And so I think this tells us a lot about the feedback that we're getting, that we're going to get a pretty broad approach to what fun is in gaming, right? So I really like that a lot. Hello to PHR Bex. Good evening to you too. Thanks for jumping in with us tonight. All right, so let's go on from here. What is your favorite RPG setting? So this one was more curiosity than anything else. As we get forward and we start putting in sort of our genericized fantasy world in the background that we're not going to get into too much detail with, I want to make sure that we have a sense of what people really love playing, what kind of stuff is really fun for them. And so we got, again, a really great mix of information. Of course, people saying my own stuff, right? Or else I like all different settings, homebrewed settings, right? All really good feedback here for us, giving us a real good sense of what people are looking at. Quite a few Forgotten Realms. People love Forgotten Realms. Planescape, of course, is a popular one. Eberron has always had a very strong following as well. A fair amount of dark settings, as well, which I thought was kind of cool and interesting to see. But good to see this and sort of get a sense of what it is that people, if they just had to pick one place they want to go back and visit, where is it in their fantasy gaming worlds, right? All right, so let's go on from there. Take a drink. So, how often do you get to play RPGs? This is one that I wasn't sure what people were going to say, right? I didn't know whether most people have a lot of time to game or if a lot of people are really stuck, maybe playing once in a while. But the majority of our respondents are playing about once a week. So, good on you guys. Nice work, everybody. It's a lot of work to get in a once a week game. And so, I absolutely appreciate the effort that goes into that. More than once a week, one person, lucky bugger, about once a month, not an uncommon one, a few times a year, and then less than once a year was one person. But the majority of our respondents are playing about once a week. And that's good to know. That gives us a sense of how often they're playing. Now, what RPG have we played the most? Well, let's see. A lot of 5th edition, lots of D&D and Savage Worlds. I'm guessing this is Fate, unless this is a system I don't know. I'm guessing a typo, but I'm not entirely sure. G and T are right next to each other. So Year Zero engine. I actually really like the Year Zero engine. We played Mutant Year Zero, and it really was a very cool game and a very cool system. It is one of those systems that doesn't go into great amounts of detail on every single thing you do, which is one of the things that I thought was interesting about it. The system that they wrote, I don't blame you. You put the time into it. Obviously, it should be your favorite system, right? 5th edition, Pathfinder, all versions of D&D. Oh my gosh, yeah. Someone was like, no, I'm not just going to, I can't say one, and I don't blame them. There are a lot of really great games out there. Hero Quest, Quest Worlds, Dungeons and Dragons, Dungeons and Dragon. Oh, Marvel phase rip. I love Marvel so much. I will never stop being a huge Marvel fan. That's not my answer, by the way. I just, to be clear. So, again, a lot of D&D 5th edition. A lot of folks are saying that they played the most. Sorry, I should say the most. This isn't their favorite to play, but the one they played the most of. So a lot of 5th edition D&D, which is not a big shock, right, as we're going through here, but also a decent amount of Pathfinder and quite a few others sprinkled in there, which I love seeing. What this tells me is that we're going to, again, get a lot of varied and feedback from the folks who are responding. And again, this is good. This is what we hoped to see, right? Because if all we saw was every single person who responded played D&D 5th edition and that's it, it's like we know that we're going to have a very specific type of response and not get a really broad response from folks. And that's what we wanted. We want a lot of different points of view and ideas. And then what's the last RPG you played? This is just to give us a sense of what people have been playing. Part of this is that as we go through some of the other questions we're going to be getting to, it allows us to tie some of that back. And again, we're going to be digging in a little bit more on this, but it allows us to tie back and say, look, if they've been playing 5th edition all the time, we say, how does this compare to the other games you've been playing? Give us a sense of what they've been playing, right? Helps us to sort of figure it out. So Mutant Year Zero, love that game. By the way, one thing I love about Mutant Year Zero is that the core Mutant Year Zero book is basically a game in a book that you play start to finish. There's a goal set out in the adventure, the game, the adventure, the rules. It's all in one book. It's almost like you sit there and you play through it with all of your friends, start to finish. Maybe once, maybe a few times, but it's all self-contained. And even though they did have a bunch of expansion books, I love that you had this sort of packaged up experience. And I just thought that was one of the coolest things about it as I played through it. Avatar Legends. All right. I have not gotten to play yet. It looks pretty cool. I struggled a little with trying to understand quite how to use the rules. And I'm hoping to watch some actual play at some point, see how some other people use it. Oh, Doctor Who. I do not know what this is supposed to be. Adventures in Time and Space. Ah, yeah. I think that's a Cubicle 7 Doctor Who. Very cool game. One I like a lot. Morp Yorg, Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, Index Card RPG, D&D 5e. So again, as you guys can see, we have a really broad response. Really loving it. That's really good that we have that. So you've gotten a little taste of what it is that the folks who are responding are playing right now. Let's take a look at how folks play tested. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on these just because this is probably not the stuff you're the most interested in. I don't want to keep you here all night. Let's take a look here. How did you review the playtest document? A number of people just skimmed it. And that's fine, right? Because to a certain extent, especially if you've gamed for 10 plus years, if you don't read all the details, you can kind of pick up on things as you go along. Although the majority of the folks did read the entire playtest document. Thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it. And read it more than once in most cases. That's what this answer is. They read through it, more than one time, and that's great. But again, about 13 of our people read through the entire things. Most people read most of it. This was, I thought, interesting. No one else, whoops, let me get rid of that. No one else had the experience where someone else read and sort of taught them how to play at the table, which I thought was sort of an interesting thing. I expected to see some of that. All right, so tell us what sort of play testing you did. Some people read the rules, and remember, you could choose more than one of these, right? Number of people created characters. The majority of the people resolved a few checks to just sort of see how it plays out. Other people ran more than one test, to sort of figure things out. Now, 9 people ran through the full encounter, and then 6 people actually started playing a little adventure of their own along the way. Beautiful, beautiful spread here of different ways to engage with the rules and the system. Really happy to see all of that. Quite a few people did stuff on their own. Remember, you could choose a bit of both. 6 folks did it with a group, and then 1 person did a little bit of both. So this, again, a very nice spread of things to get different points of view on this as we go through it. All right. Now let's get on to the playtest group. Most of the groups, most people were players. We also had a few GMs, a few players and GMs. And this applied if you had a group. Keep in mind that we only showed you these questions if you said you gamed with a group. Otherwise, we didn't show these to you. The majority played in person. Few played online. A few did both. How many people were in your group? More than 6 in one case. And I mean, in 3 cases. Now, maybe they're all in the same group, but more than 6 is a big group. Dang. That's awesome. 6 people in one group, but good sized groups. And again, this kind of conforms to my expectations. The more than 6 was a little bit of a surprise, but for the most part, people are looking at about 4 to 5 people in their group. So this fits with my expectations for the groups. And for the ages, we had a huge range, right? So we had all sorts. The only thing that I thought was fascinating is we didn't have any 26 to 35, which is just fascinating to me. I don't know how that ended up being that way, but it's just fascinating. We know 26 to 35-year-olds. So maybe we need to get more of that market, or maybe this is the market that we're aiming at. They did say that for most of these crowdfunding projects, it's usually around the age of 40 is like your average age. So this doesn't surprise me too much in terms of crowdfunding perspective. And again, remember, this is how old the people in the group were, not necessarily how old the person responding to the survey was, right? So we could have all different ages there. How much time did they spend? 1 to 2 hours was the average. Again, no shock there. But all of this is great, right? Like I haven't seen, when I went through this, I didn't see any red flags where I went, oh, I don't know how I feel about that, that we're going to have a gap there, or we're going to maybe be leaning too far in one direction or the other, right? So now let's talk about learning the core mechanic. In this case, we wanted to know how hard it was to read through it and figure out how to use it. Most people thought it was pretty easy. 13 people thought it was easy. 5 didn't think it was either easy or difficult, just sort of run of the mill. And 1 person thought it was difficult. Needless to say, I couldn't be happier with these results. These are very, very cool results to get, to have that many people feeling comfortable with how easy it was to learn the system. So now we dug a little bit into a little more detail on how easy it was to learn different elements of the core mechanic. So the first part is calculating action scores, right? That involves going through and figuring out what your ability is and what your skill is and adding these together. And again, we're talking about learning, not using, learning. Most people thought it was pretty easy to learn it. A couple people thought it was a little difficult. So we need to look at that. Now, there's a few things that why we might end up with difficulty here. For example, also calculating difficulty. How do you figure it out? Some of this could be due to the system, and we're going to need to refine it and tweak it over time. Some of it could be due to the way it's presented, which that's a completely valid reason for something to be more difficult than it needs to be. So we need to look at that. This is enough that we need to think about this and try to figure out how we make it easier for folks. But at the same time, the overall response was very positive. Determining modifiers was one area where things got a little bit trickier. More middle of the road for folks than anything. They didn't think it was particularly hard or easy. Applying modifiers, again, middle of the road. Here, finding your action dice was generally very positive, except we had 1 person who just was flat out like, nah, it just didn't work. And you'll notice that we have this throughout. Now, what I couldn't tell you right now, and because I haven't pulled it up and I would need to do it without sharing with everyone, is this the same person in each case? It might be, right? For some people, the system like this is just not going to cut it. And I did ask people to please do this still, even if it wasn't quite their system, to still give us their feedback. And I'm glad to have this because we need to hear from the folks who don't love it, who don't find it easy, so we can make it even better. And so this is really good to hear. And the determining outcome, very easy across the board. So I got to say that the general response here is that people had a positive experience in terms of learning the system. It wasn't harder than most other games. It was generally all right. Asking how easy was it to learn it compared to other RPGs you played recently? Generally, the feedback is great. One was more difficult, one was much more difficult. Again, it'll be interesting to go back and sort of tie together like what games they've played recently to get a better sense of what that means. I'm sorry that I can't share that with you guys today, but that is something that we're going to be digging into a little more as well. But again, I think the important part here is whether or not we got a generally positive response, and we did. So far, in terms of learning it, I'm not seeing anything that are any red flags on us saying, yeah, we're in big trouble here, right? Because we could have had that. Let's be honest. We all went into this project not really knowing how things would roll, and we could have ended up with that, right? So now let's talk about ease of play. Now, we're not talking about speed. We're not talking about learning. We're talking about how easy it just to use the game at the table. How often do you sit there and go like, how am I supposed to do this, right? Try to figure it out. Ease of play. So looking at it here, very easy. Quite a few people thought it was very easy. Some thought it was easy, and others says neither difficult nor easy. I love this. We didn't get any negative responses. We did have 10 people skip, which these are probably folks who were like reading through the instructions as opposed to actually playing it. And that's okay, right? Because they wouldn't have actually used it in play. I appreciate that they said, look, I'm not really in a position to answer this, right? So looking through there, we get to the next thing. How easy was it to use the different elements? Calculating action scores. You know, we did have some folks, and again, we had 10 skip compared to this, let's see, 17. That means even though they generally found it easy to use, there were some aspects of it that were not easy to use, and especially calculating action scores. I like to think part of this is because we don't have that nailed down in the rules yet, like what things you're adding together. Are you adding skills to attribute? How are you putting those pieces together? But we may need to dig into this a little bit more. But we did see some difficulty here. Also, calculating difficulty, we saw a little bit of challenge there. Now, we recognize that this is the first and last time people have played this version of the playtest. So there's going to be some difficulty, but we want to avoid it as much as possible. So again, calculating the difficulty score, calculating the action scores did cause some bumps in the road for people. So we need to look at that a little bit as we're going into our next playtest. How do we smooth that out? The next surveys will have some focus on that specific area. And that's one thing you'll find is that if things are going well for people, we probably won't on the next survey really hammer on that, but we might jump on some of these other things that have difficulty for folks. Going on from there, determining modifiers, neither easy or difficult for the most part. Other people found it quite easy. One person found it kind of difficult. Again, same thing for applying modifiers. Finding your action dice. This one is key. This one's key because the number one concern we got from folks was around whether that table was going to be a bump in the road, whether that table was going to cause problems. From this, and we haven't gotten to the speed yet, we'll get to that in a minute. From this, as far as how easy it is, no one had any trouble finding their action dice. They jump in there, they find them. Determining your outcome, not hard to do, nice and easy. People like that as well. The action table itself, we also, even though this kind of tells us about the action table, this also is specific to the action table. There was a little bit of difficulty with it for some folks. And so we do need to remember that. We need to keep looking at that and make sure that we're not making this any more complicated than necessary. All right, so next up is going to be how it compares to the 5th edition core rules, the core mechanic of D&D. Compared to D&D, some people haven't played D&D, not a problem. But looking at here, only one person thought it was more difficult than 5th edition. This couldn't make me happier, guys. This is awesome, right? This is awesome news to have because it means that people were not having a harder time, at least in terms of the game, using it in their games than they do using the core mechanic for D&D. So that's really nice to hear. Also, how does the core mechanics ease of play compared to other RPGs you've played recently? It's slightly more difficult than the games other people have played. Now, I think this is a really valuable piece of that we're going to need to dig into a little bit. Some of the things I'm going to want to know is tying back to what games those people normally play, what games they've been playing. That'll help us to understand is, have they been playing a game that is designed around easier play? Or is it, say, if they've been playing like GURPS and they found this more difficult, that's a problem, right? We need to try to figure that out. So these are things that I want to try to take a look at. But overall, the response was very positive. So that's really good to hear. I'm really happy to see that overall. But we do need to look at this a little bit to sort of get a feel for what was difficult about it. And people tell us some of that in the sections coming up. All right, let me scroll back up. Sorry, make everyone dizzy with my scrolling. Now let's talk about speed of play. This is important because if you'll remember, one of the key things for our core rule set is that it plays fast at the table. So if it doesn't play fast at the table, we're going to have to do something about it. So let's take a look at it. How would you describe the speed of play? Very fast, fast, or about average? I'm okay with those responses. That is not a bad spread of responses. I would have liked to have seen more fast or very fast. I'd like to find out more about where people are slowing down, but that's not a terrible outcome. We did have a couple of people who thought it was slow. Now, I think part of that, and we'll get to that in a minute, has to do with modifiers. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. All right. Just so we're going through here, I'm going to stop for 1 second. Multiverse D&D said games with visual learning tools will advance the industry. I'm assuming you're talking about, for example, playing Cards 10 IO can host ultralight VVTs. I'll come back to those comments in a second here because now we got a bunch of stuff coming in. I don't want to miss those. So let me move back through and I'll come to that when I get to the end of this page here. So how does the core mechanic speed of play compare to 5th edition? 2 people said slower, 6 said about the same, and others said faster. This is beautiful. We're very happy to see this. This is good news. And then how does it compare to the other RPGs you've played recently? Again, a couple people said it was a little slower, and I'd like to learn more about that. But this overall, what I'm hearing so far is that we haven't made a terrible mistake. And that's what's super important to me, right? I'm very happy about that we're not completely barking up the wrong tree on this one. I'm going to take a second here to talk about some of the comments that are coming in because I just want to share some of these. Multiverse D&D was saying that games with visual learning tools will advance the industry. And then they also said, I'm going to add this in here as well so we can take a look at it, that, for example, playing Cards.io, I think is what that is, can host ultralight VVTs to instantly playtest any RPG. The tools are out there. People and players have to want the answers. Yeah, I mean, this is stuff that we can dig into. I'm not entirely familiar with what you're talking about here because Cards.io, I apologize if I'm doing it wrong here. This is something new to me. But yeah, it's something that we can look at. Now, certainly there are some ways that we can auto test some of this, and we've done a little of that, right, with running statistics and numbers and running formulas to sort of get a feel for how things are going to play out. And we've done a fair amount of that in terms of the math. Also stated, Michael Garrett pointed out that having the action table on my group's character sheet helped immensely. Yeah, it does. And I got to tell you, one thing I liked, we had the full page sheets right on the game table for people to look at. They ended up looking at that even more. Maybe it's because all of us are older and wearing glasses now, but we slapped it right on the table and it worked out really well. I do know that, for example, when we played Earth Dawn, we literally just made a chart to put on the wall because Earth Dawn went up to like 35 or 40 as far as the numbers did. So we had the whole chart like on the wall when we were playing so we could reference it. Now, I don't want it to people have to reference the chart that much, But if you have it on the character sheet, like Michael was saying, I think that it can certainly help in terms of people being able to reference it. All right. So let me go ahead and jump back into looking at our results. Jump in and take a look here. We reached the bottom of how fast it plays. Let's get on to some of the overall experience. Overall, people liked the game. Two people didn't like it. That's good to know. A couple people just that weren't fans of it. It looks like this is the same group that's been answering all the questions. So we've got 10 skipped, 17 answers. Maybe a incautious assumption to make, but yeah, we've got a decent response of people who really enjoyed what they did with the game, playing with the system, and using the core mechanic. Now, looking at this is something that at some point here, I'm going to be building this out into one of those word clouds. That's part of the reason I did this. And I'll be posting that on Discord, and I'll post it on Facebook so you guys can see it there, and post it to the Kickstarter notes. But looking across here, we had 3 people who thought that it was complicated, the core mechanic, which is unfortunate. That's an unfortunate word that I really am not thrilled with. By the way, the order was different for every single person who answered the question. So you never had the same order. So whatever you saw, other people saw something different. We did that on purpose so that no one was like influenced by a certain word appearing at the very beginning. Complex came up, frustrating came up, but a lot of really good things came in as well. Enjoyable, exciting, fair. And we had an equal number of good words and bad words on here, right? With, both negative and positives across the board. Some slow as well, a little confusing for some folks. So we did have some folks who had a tougher experience, but a lot of folks who had very good experiences with it. So what I have to say right now is that overall, we're very happy with how things turned out. We're very happy with the responses we received in terms of what it's telling us, right? PH Arbex just said that printing the tables doesn't work if you're playing Rollmaster. No one has that much paper, man. We can't print all the tables. That's why you have whole books of tables at your table, right? Love some Rollmaster tables. Anyway, what I'm seeing here is very good stuff overall. I'm feeling really good about what we've got. Now let's get to some of the final thoughts. This is where people could really put in their information and talk in detail about what they're writing. So the quickness of play, let's talk. We're going to kind of go through these. I'll talk about them. The quickness of play and not having to refer, these are good things. Not having to refer to rule books during play allows the story to keep moving. That is good. Now, one thing we do need to keep in mind is to recognize that that's going to change a little once there are more rules. So we need to make sure we're always keeping that part in mind because that's an important aspect of this. Core mechanic can be used to cover all sorts of checks needed in the system. Also a good thing to hear, this is one thing we wanted to see. They liked players having input on modifiers. I think that's really cool. I actually heard that in anecdotal responses from people as well, that they really loved that they could go out there and come up with their own ways to sort of enhance their role and enhance the adventure. I want us to keep that in mind because that was a very positive for a lot of people. I love that I did not have to add modifiers after rolling. Just roll the dice and compare. I like that the modifiers are additive to either difficulty score or action score. A lot of potential. I think it's a really cool point that, to be fair, I didn't really think about it. And I don't think it came up in our conversations online or in playtest. The whole idea that this system doesn't require you to roll to add numbers after the roll. They're all before the roll happens. And that is kind of cool in a way. It kind of, puts focus on one area. So you're doing one thing at a time with each step of the game. No strong feelings here. My enjoyment comes from the story of RPGs, not the mechanics. As the mechanics go, it did seem a bit faster than many, in particular Pathfinder Voyage. Lots of modifiers, which consume a lot of time remembering. Yeah, that's fair. And, we may end up having modules that have those sorts of heavy modifier tables that I think some people are going to really want in their games, but others are not, right? And the nice thing here is it gives you that option, a way to sort of still take modifiers into account. Like the step dice with caveats, I thought it would be harder to get the hang of than it was. I've heard this a lot, not just here, but from lots of people who have tried it. They were like, including at our table, they're like, that was not as hard to get the hang of as I thought it was. Turns out that most things I wanted to do had a similar role because the ability to frame the contest, so there was less to calculate than I thought. Very good feedback. It sparked the imagination, especially for the variable successes with exploding dice and things, right? Speed and ease of play. Translating action score to dice was easy. Action score table having the positive modifiers increase action score and negative increase difficulty score. Simplicity, flexibility, and so on. So really good feedback. Now, I'm going to stop on one of these here. Things that we can improve. Solidify the core mechanics abilities. You are absolutely right. That's coming up next. This one here, I spent time writing up detailed feedback, which this survey will not capture. So first off, if you ever feel like that, just reach out to me on Facebook or Discord or Kickstarter. You can email me a doc. You can send me your feedback. I will take whatever you've got. By no means do we want you to feel like you can't give us your feedback and information, especially in this case where it looks like you are mainly looking for validation of your idea, not genuine feedback. Well, I'm sorry that the person felt this way. And part of the reason why I'm talking about this here and digging into this comment is that I want this person and anyone else who's playtesting to know that we do want to hear the tough things. We do want to hear the challenges you ran into. In terms of looking for validation, I'd be curious what made them think that, because every question had a range of answers from awful to great, right? Or great to awful. So we really did want people to offer their honest feedback on this, right? So let's see. Let's take a little look. We're not going to go through every detail because there's a lot here, right? So, but I'm just going to touch on some of the things. They noted that they like a larger range of difficulty scores and action scores for normal play. I have to admit, I'm not convinced about the current range of scores as well, right? And they also point out that it means it's a big deal to give a character a +1 magical sword because it's effectively a 15% increase, right? I'm a little worried about that, right? That we kind of might need to look at that and say, do we spread this out a little bit more? And that's something that I haven't quite gotten an answer to figure out the right answer there yet. We still need to work that one out, but I think we can work that out a little bit later. We can still go forward right now without working that out. But yeah, that might be an issue still, right? I'm still do have a concern. That's one of the things I'm going to be pushing our consulting designers for in their next survey, their next challenge, to tell us more about that, right? Multiverse D&D pointed out that larger ranges reduce player failure potential, right? All right, so let me take a look. Not a fan of a D6 or a 2D6 games because anything that gives the player a +1 point boost in the game is game changing. Yeah, again, that could be something we need to take a look at. I would much rather play this core mechanic by having the game master take into account all the positive and negative modifiers and apply them to the difficulty score. You know what? We can do that. That is absolutely something we could do. That's something that, whether or not that ends up in the core rules, which is our old basic set, that is something that you could absolutely do. And I think that it would be very interesting to play that out. It certainly would be a good way to do it. And then the players would only have to include static modifiers. So yeah, those are some things that we can take a look at. Now, I've read through the rest of this. I'm not going to go through all of this because, it certainly is a lot of really great feedback, but I'm just hitting on some of the highlights here. They pointed out here that there's some statistical problems with the action scores. I'd be interested to learn more about that because we put a lot of time into the math around that. And I can share that. Again, it's on the Discord server. I've shared the chart before, and I shared it in one of our early documents. But we put a lot of thought and time into the math on that. So that's something I'd be interested in hearing more about. So I might be reaching out to this person to get some more information from them because they have some great points. Honestly, to anyone taking this long to tell us their thoughts on this, hugely valuable. And I want to make sure to let folks know that I appreciate that. So I may be reaching out to ask them some more questions. So let's see here. Even though the skill expert master idea is good. Oh, this has to do with the skill difficulty, right? They talked about DS12 is really hard with the highest action score being a 7. So either encounter needs you know what this is? I had a DS12 difficulty in the test encounter and everyone was like, that's just too hard, dude. We can't do it. This came up again here. If you need to roll a 12 or above in a D20 system. Oh, sorry, it's something different. But yeah, this came up a few times. That difficulty score 12 might not have been the right choice. Selected confusing on the previous scheme because unlike D20 mechanics, it's hard to gauge how likely success or failure is going to be. That's not an unfair argument. I mean, if you're rolling two different dice and you have to add them together and you don't quite know what you're going to get, I could see that as being a challenge. I think that if you know that you've got about a little better than, 50-50 chance, if you're rolling difficulty 6 against action score 6, you might have a good start. But this is a fair point that I would like to learn more about as we go along and see if other people are sitting there kind of going like, I don't know if I got any good chance or a bad chance. I guess I'll find out. So I'd be curious what other people thought about that. Modifiers and mod hunting. Yeah, we know this is one of the things that turned up and has come up quite a few times, right? Quite a few people were slowed down by this. So I don't quite know what the answer is going to be for this. This is something that come up. This is one of those things that's going to affect some groups and not others. And so what we need to find out is, does it affect most groups or some groups? And for the groups it affects, how can we mitigate this, right? How can we mitigate this as well? We're going to have to see. Also, not a fan of not sure if they're sold on the exploding dice, so that's important as well. But yeah, we're going to have to take a look at this. And they were saying that their modifiers, though, were by far the slowest part of the game. So we have to play with that a little bit. We're going to have to find some answers to that. Lack of mechanisms for critical rolls. Yeah, so, I mean, to some extent, there is a mechanism for a critical roll, whereas if you have an effect, if it's based off what you roll, the actual numeric value of what you roll, that's effectively a critical without calling it that, right? So if I open end 3 times and I do 20 damage, that's a critical. We just don't call it a critical. I'm wondering, what we could do to help with that. Another thing that some games do is if you roll like 10 over your difficulty, that's a critical. We could do something like that. That might work as well. So it's something that we can think about, right? Let's see. Someone was sad we didn't have a dice pool system. Yeah, I know. I like dice pool systems too. I'm sorry, guys. It just turned out that wasn't the direction that we ended up going with it. Let's see. To add more complexity to make simulation. This is something we're going to look at, right? Because right now this is super basic and some people are going to enjoy that. But one of our things that we took back from all of our backers and all of you is that you want to have some danger. You want to have the threat of actually being injured. You want to be struggling at times. We need to add those rules in. But here's the thing, a good mechanic will allow us to do that. And we can add that complexity. So I feel good about our ability to address that one. A list of suggested mods would help to speed up the process of calculating action and difficulty numbers. Yeah, so, we could look at doing that when you're saying like, here's a list of things that could increase your action score. Here's the things that would increase your difficulty score. Listing those things out, that sounds like a decent idea, right? Because people have something to work from, right? Right. Determining a difficulty score. It was struggle to determine a fair value. I'd love to know more about that just because that was kind of the idea of that whole skill thing, but we might need to relook it. Right. All right. And then it's tough to track down info in the text. Yeah. It is a playtest doc. It's not probably the best yet, but we'll go back to that because to be fair, I don't have anyone editing the playtest docs yet. It's literally just me putting this stuff together at this point based on the feedback that we get from everybody, our consulting designers and all of you. All right, last section, final thoughts that people wanted to talk about. Does the core mechanic make it easy for the player to make a decision about what they want their character to do? That's interesting because this is, again, saying it's hard to tell what you're likely to succeed at on a check. So I don't know. I'm going to be looking to all of you to give me some feedback on this. Part of me wonders if it's that it's hard for you to have the perception that you know what your chances are, or if you truly struggle to figure out what your chances are. Because I don't know that most people know what their real odds are of rolling a certain number on like a D20. Like, I mean, I know they say like, well, I got a 50-50 chance. So if you have like a 10 and you're rolling a D20, there's no modifiers. Maybe but I don't know. I feel like that simplifies it, and I'm not sure if it's more of a illusion of understanding. I'm going to need you guys to tell me on that one. I really don't know what the case is and what we can do about that to help with it. It might have to be part of a follow-up survey on this, right? Um, Playing around with the idea that the flat score action resolution is standard, but the players can always take the narrative in their own hands by grabbing dice and rolling. So this person was saying that they were doing it, they were just comparing the scores as a standard and rolling if they wanted to try to do something really tough or complicated. That's pretty awesome, right? A failure means you add a complication. I really like that. That's a pretty cool way to do it. Also, they were looking at a limited meta resource called Focus that can be used to total up to add to the total of their failed rolled up to an equal success. Could be very cool, right? Do we need to get into having to hunt for a dozen modifiers on every roll? One thing D&D 5e got right was the idea of simplifying modifiers. Yeah, I mean, we certainly could. You could certainly simplify it more by just reducing it to, instead of you could just have a +2 to one or a +2 to the other. That's something we could do, and especially if it was a module. So yeah, good point. We'll think about that one. But also lack of a clear way to boost one skill with another appropriate one. That's pretty cool. I don't know quite how we would do that. It's something that, because we're using this adding it up sort of system, how do you add that up without blowing your number up too big? It's tricky, but it is an interesting thing to think about, because it is kind of fun to be able to start creatively mixing and matching your skills and saying, I get a benefit. I mean, I guess what I would say is that as a GM, I might say, if you have a skill that complements the skill you're using, right? So let's say I'm trying to hit a moving target using a cannon. Okay, well, maybe that's my coordination. However, maybe I also have a physics skill that allows me to run the mathematics involved in figuring out whether I can hit. I could say, well, I'm going to give you +1 to your action score for that. That's how I would handle it personally. But, there might be other ways you can do it as well. But I think that would be a very cool way to do it. Dice pools are excellent for fueling stunts and magic. Module, a single D6 is an upswing downturn die. Roll a 1 for bad stuff, 6 for fortune. Yeah, you could add that in. That would be totally a cool module you could do, right? Yeah, Multiverse D&D asked, the term in cool name, what we've been calling rules modules, are these things you can plug into the system to modify the game. We're trying to build it so it's like plug and play, where you can drop in the pieces that you want, pull out or swap out pieces. And that's what a module is in this system. Not a fan of mixing different dice for checks, just seems wrong. Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that one. It's for some people it'll work and some people that won't, right? Notice that +1 could wildly affect the outcome of any roll, and immediately started mod hunting, which slows down the game. Yeah, that could definitely happen. We talked about that as being a risk for some groups, and we need to try to figure out how we can help those groups to not run into that problem, right? Players found it intuitive once they understood how to get the action score. They even loved negotiating for mods. So here we've got two completely opposite responses, right? We got one group that loved it and had a blast, and we had another group that didn't. This is the challenge we're going to have in the end. We won't please everybody, but hopefully we'll be able to give both of these groups a system with modules that allow them to tweak it to their style of play. And we were wondering what we should do when combining 2 skill checks into a single action. Jumping over a pit and attacking in a single round. Do we roll 2 checks? Are there penalties? Interesting. Good question. We haven't gotten that far with it. I think that I might add like a 1 to the difficulty skill of both might be one way to do it, because you could say that you're doing 2 things at once. Or you could say add 1 for each action that you're doing on the turn. It's something we should experiment with. We should try that out. All right. So folks, that is the end of the survey. As you can see, the overall results were very good. We got very good results overall, and I'm super happy about that. We still have areas that we're going to have to work on, but we got time to do it. I think we're still on track to get a decent playtest book out by January, which, if you remember, that was our goal. Have a decent playtest book in place by January. We wanted to have the basic rules in hand by August, by Gen Con. Did not hit that exactly. We got this out, but we do have coming out this week the next playtest book, which is going to be based in part with changes based on what you talked about, expanding certain areas. We're going to be pulling in attributes to see how people like the attributes that we have right now, the spread of attributes. We're going to be upping it to 9 attributes. We're going to be looking at a skill-based system this time around. People can certainly keep using MOs if they want. This totally cool and fun if folks want to do that. But we will be pulling in more of a skill-based system, including ways to sort of specialize in skills and how you go about doing that. And then plus, we're going to be putting a little bit more weight on the combat. The one thing I can't tell you today is whether or not we're changing that spread. We might try to expand it a little bit to blow it out a little bit so we have a little bit more range in what's happening there, right? We don't want it to get too complicated where you're rolling too many dice at once, trying to add 4 or 5 dice up at the same time. But we may need to spread that out just to put a little more character to it and to make the +1 a little less impactful at that point, right? Because you're going to have a little bit broader spread of difficulties, and thus the +1 stops being quite that vital. In the meantime, thank you all for all the work you've done here. The work here, the work over there on Discord, the work over on Facebook, the feedback folks have sent me directly. Absolutely amazing. Thank you all for that. We're off to an amazing start. More to come soon. And in the meantime, we're also going to be talking to our consulting designers some more based on the feedback we got from all of you. And I'll be back next week and we'll talk some more. We also are working up a live play. Oh, forgot a couple things. Let me just tell you one more thing really quick before we stop. I did an interview on Halfling and Spaceman. I will post this to a few different places for you guys on Discord and Facebook. I talked a little bit about Cool Name there, as well as a whole bunch of other things. But the Halfling and Spaceman podcast I was on just the other day, and so that's out now. But now, for real, now I'm going to go. Thank you all. I'll talk to you guys all later, and keep gaming. See you guys.